everybody, welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be getting into our very long overdue review of the second Doctor Who anniversary special, Wild Blue Yonder. Now, in my defense, whereas the last review for the Star Beast was late because of my own fault, because of me just being very lazy, this one is actually late because I actually wanted to rewatch this episode a few times, because of the 3 anniversary specials that we were getting in this period, this was the one that I was the most interested in, because it was the one that we knew the absolute least about going into it. We had very little information on what was going to happen. We'd only had very few clips or actual footage of anything from this episode from trailers or press release, so there was really a lot of skepticism and a lot of intrigue as to what we were actually going to get in this episode. So I actually watched it the first time as I got back from work, and after that first rewatch, I was like, I can't review this episode because a lot happened. There was a lot that I had very conflicting feelings on. So I've actually rewatched this episode another 2 times in between the airing date and of recording this video. So that is why this one has been late, because I really just didn't feel like I was in a position to review it after one viewing. I've had to watch it again and again. But now that we finally got through it, I feel like I can confidently give my thoughts on this episode and my feelings overall, so let's get straight into it. In terms of the plot for this episode, this one carries on straight off the ending of the Star Beast, where Donna had spilt coffee on the TARDIS, and it was doing a bit of a madness going around different points in time. The TARDIS then strands them on this ship that's stuck at the very edge of the known universe. It leaves them there, and the Doctor and Donna have to basically explore this ship to try and figure out where they are and to try and devise a way home. Meanwhile, you've got all these very creepy things going on the inside of the ship, and also banging noises coming from the outside. And eventually we realise there are 2 alien life forms aboard the ship who are trying to impersonate the Doctor and Donna, and they basically chase them around the entire base whilst they try to figure out the story as to what happened on this ship. So starting off with the positives of Wild Blue Yonder, I really appreciated the fact that this was a very character-focused episode on the Doctor and Donna, because David Tennant and Catherine Tate, of course, I love them as a pairing, and for about 95% of this episode, they are the only 2 people that we have on screen. Apart from the opening scene and the ending scene, which I'll get into, they pretty much dominate the entire episode with their presence. Not just them playing the Doctor and Donna, but of course them also playing the villains at the centerpiece as well, because they are taking on an evil form of the actual Doctor and Donna. And I really like that. I like this focus on their characters. We've got a lot more in depth in terms of their fears, their worries. You explore things like the Doctor and his worries and his regrets in terms of the timeless child and Flux. And with Donna, it's about the fact that she's now stranded away from this family that she'd built up over this time when she didn't realise or that she had these memories of the Doctor. And I really like that. I really like this character-focused episode, because I didn't know if we were going to get an episode like this, but I kind of hoped that this was the direction that they were going to go into once we got into the trailers closer to release. And I'm grateful that they stuck with this tone, because I do really like this approach that they had here. They very much did a very good job of kind of fleshing out how these 2 characters, of course they're being mates, so we get to see a lot of jokes and banter with them on screen, but really getting to understand that they have changed as people in the 15-year gap in between their last adventures together that they can remember. So I really did appreciate that, and I really did like how focused this episode was on those 2 characters. And because this episode was so character driven and had so few characters actually in it, I loved the kind of midnight vibes that we got with this one. That was the episode that this very much reminded me of. It's a very minimalist episode in terms of the actual characters and the plot, but it's about the themes and what they do within that. Midnight, it was obviously these characters that were all stuck on this flight, and there was this entity trying to take them off one by one, except in here it's kind of you shrink the cast, but you kind of expand the concept of that confined space. And you know, it works in some elements with this episode, because of course I really enjoy the character elements. There's other bits where it doesn't work as well, which I'll get onto in the negatives, but I do appreciate that. I do like how it kind of harkened to Midnight, which is what I hoped this episode was going to be. And I really did appreciate that, because of course Midnight is one of my favourite episodes ever of Doctor Who, so if you make anything that's nearly close to that, then of course I'm going to be very happy. And I do like the fact that this episode took that kind of approach with having these very horror vibes with very few characters, keeping it claustrophobic, but also allowing room for actual character depth and motivation, as we discussed earlier with the episode focusing on the Doctor and Donna. And because of the focusing on those two, not only did we get the great scenes of their character fears and worries and really making us relate with their characters throughout a lot of scenes in this episode, it also meant that when they got together, there was a lot of comedic moments. Like I said in the Star Piece, it made me realize how much I love those two as a pairing. The whole story as well of the episode I also did really like. I liked the whole backstory of us being stuck on the ship and we find out these things about that there was a captain here but they're not present, there's no life forms on the ship, and then we find out that a door on the ship opened and closed, and you have the banging on the outside. I thought that was all really interesting, and the way that they kind of slowly added more elements to the story, and then as you get to the end of the episode you then realise what happened with the captain, why they sacrificed themselves. I really liked all of that. It was a very, very smart way, and I liked how they kind of had the story there and then they kind of play in the background whilst we get the two main villains taking the spotlight, and how they bring the story back in at the end in a really satisfying way. I really liked that. It was a really underrated aspect of the story, and I think it's something that not a lot of people talked about, but I really did like the way that they kind of addressed and handled that. And of course, speaking of the villains themselves, I did quite like them. I do admit, though, I do wish we got a bit more with them in terms of their backstory and motivations, because they did remind me a little bit of the doppelgangers that we had in Series 6. You know, kind of got similar vibes to them, but I did like the fact that we only had the two of them here, and they were obviously based off the Doctor and Donna. And I think they did some very creepy things with them. They were memorable, certainly for the wrong reasons at certain points, which once again I'll get into with the negatives, but I did appreciate what they tried to do with them, and especially, like I say, because of how they managed to get some really good character moments out of them, with obviously the Doctor and Donna sometimes not knowing if the person they're speaking to is actually them or these doppelgangers. And like I say, the moments, especially the one with the 10th Doctor where Donna brings up about the Flux and the Timeless Child story arc. As much as I don't like those story arcs, I thought the way that Russell T Davies handled it in this episode, I thought was exceptionally well done. I'd honestly argue that he managed it better in this episode than Chibnall ever did throughout his entire run. The whole emotion of that scene, and then Tennant's reaction afterwards of the 14th Doctor when he leaves, he realises he's been basically ployed, and then he's just has this fit of rage. Like, it was really powerful. I really liked that, and the fact that we were able to get those kind of moments because of the villains and the concept, really good. I really enjoyed that. And of course, I have to mention Wilf. We got to see Wilf at the very end of this episode, and after the whole shenanigans on the ship where we found the ship's going to blow up, you have that scene where you think that the Doctor's taken the wrong Donna on the TARDIS, then he realises his mistake, yeets her out, brings the proper Donna back in, and then we get to Earth and we have Wilf there. And I cried so much when this scene happened, because I love Wilf as a companion. He's one of my favourite companions on the entire show. I knew that he had been filming for these specials because I had seen the set photos of Bernard Cribbins on set. We knew that unfortunately Bernard Cribbins passed away only a few weeks after those leaked videos of him being on the set of the 60th came out. We didn't know 100% if he was going to be back or not, but I'm so grateful that we got this scene with him at the end of the episode. Him seeing Donna with her memories back, seeing the 14th Doctor, the two of them together. It was so lovely. And again, he just brought so much heart to that one scene that he was in. You were lucky if it was like, what, a minute and a half long. But Bernard Cribbins, man, I love that man. He is a national treasure, and it pains me that he's sadly no longer with us. And I didn't realise until after the episode aired, because Russell T Davies put a post out on Instagram, that sadly this was the only scene that they managed to film with Bernard Cribbins. But I'm eternally grateful that we got this one scene, that we got to see him on screen one final time to honour Wilf and to honour Bernard Cribbins. So that was a lovely way to end the episode. In terms of the mixed element that I have for this episode, though, I will say I do think the way they marketed this episode was a little bit strange. The reason I say that is because I understand why Russell did it, because he's done an interview since with the Doctor Who podcast that he wanted to not spoil too much about the episode because of how simple it was, and he liked having surprises. Now, I don't honestly mind that aspect of it, but the reason I question it is because when you do that kind of thing, when you're withholding so much stuff about an episode, when the episode in question is airing during the 60th anniversary period, I felt like it kind of led to a lot of very unnecessary speculation as to what was going to happen, because a lot of people, because of this episode having so little info know about it, everyone was like, Matt Smith's going to be in the episode, Peter Capaldi's going to be in the episode, the first Doctor's going to be in this episode, the fourth Doctor's going to be in the episode. I never personally believed that we would get another Doctor in this episode, just purely because we got Power of the Doctor last year, which had so many previous Doctors. But I can't blame anybody for thinking that, because of the fact that they were radio silent and because this episode was airing during the 60th anniversary specials, and because they said nothing, I do feel like they kind of caused this to themselves, with all these people eventually being disappointed because these people were not in the episode. I don't dislike the idea of them doing it, I just think timing it for this period was the wrong idea. If they had done this for an episode in the upcoming series 14, I wouldn't have minded it, but when you're doing it for a 60th anniversary special, then I think when you end up seeing what episode this ended up being, you kind of sit there and you think, was there really a point in holding so much back about this episode's marketing? Again, it's not a complete negative, but I definitely think in hindsight, and I think Russell has even said this as well, they probably should have just released more information about this episode, because ultimately it avoids those kind of people getting disappointed with the episode, and rightfully so, when nothing is being said about it. Now, in terms of the negatives, the first major one, and probably the one that I think most people will agree on, was the CGI. Now, I understand that Doctor Who obviously does not have the greatest of budgets, but even with the fact that I know that obviously they are given more of a budget now than they had done when Russell T Davies was showrunner originally, the CGI in this episode was very, very noticeable. The worst offenders for me were any scenes that took place in that gigantic hallway where you have that slow-moving robot. You could tell that there was a green screen behind them when they were on a treadmill. I've seen the behind-the-scenes videos, and I know that some parts of it were practical, but you could just tell they were walking behind a green screen. And it was very glaringly distracting for me anytime we had a scene in that section in the episode that it wasn't real. And the other big offender for me was the doppelgangers when they got big and they were kind of crawling through there and they slowly get bigger as the Doctor and Donna are trying to get away from them. I did find that bit very comical as well, because they tried to make out this very tense chase scene, but you sat there trying not to laugh because of these weird effects to try and make these doppelganger versions look even bigger, to the point where they get too big. Yeah, it just felt a bit too much for me. I think if they had managed to execute the effects better, I think those scenes would have been a lot more scary than they were supposed to be, which kind of again leads to another negative, which was that a lot of the scenes in this episode that tried to be scary, I felt like just didn't quite hit the mark because they were let down by the visual effects. The visual effects made it look very uncanny, and whilst to some people that might make it more scary for them, for me it kind of took me out of the moment because I could just clearly tell that it wasn't real. And so because of that, a lot of the horror in this episode didn't quite land for me in the same way that something like Midnight did, where because it had very little CGI and it relied entirely on the actors' performances selling the scariness of the creature, I felt that was far more effective than what they tried to do here. I respect it in certain aspects because some of it was practical and I'm aware of that, but whenever it did convert to CGI, like I say, the moments in the hallway where they get big or when they trying to form into these different creatures and you can tell that the CGI, it felt very fake to me. Another negative that I do have with the episode as well is that I do think the humor, whilst it was very good, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, I think that its placement within the scenes that are trying to be scary or supposed to have tension, it did end up making the episode just not quite have the same fear factor as I think it was trying to do. Like when I think of episodes like Heaven Sent or Waters of Mars or Midnight, when those episodes have their scares, I feel like when they have the comedic moments, they placed them in much better scenarios so that it didn't break up the tension, whereas I feel like here they just went too overboard at times with the humour. And I know some people will try and make the defence of, oh, it was done on purpose, but to me it did feel a little bit too much in terms of just completely breaking the tension and kind of just losing any suspense that we built up before those moments. And also, while I do appreciate Russell actually addressing the whole timeless child story arc, as a part of me does also pray that they don't go into it again, because again, like I said earlier, I'm not a fan of that story arc. I respect Russell trying to carry it on from what Chibnall had done beforehand, and granted I think he did a much better job here than Chibnall ever did, but if it was down to me personally, I would prefer that they just never mention it again like they did with the whole Doctor's mother's being half human that they had in the TV movie that's just been pretty much dropped since. That's what I would have preferred to have happened, but if they're going to approach it, I think Russell's probably one of the better people I would trust in tackling it going forward. I just am very cautious as to how they're going to approach it, because it is a story arc and a story decision that I was never a fan of, so what they're going to do with it in the future, I'm a bit concerned about, but we'll just have to wait and see. But overall, I did enjoy Wild Blue Yonder. It's certainly a more trickier episode to fully land my opinions on, because it's a very complex episode to talk about. It's not as straightforward as the Star Beast, so it's kind of harder to kind of give my overall thoughts, but I do think the highs in this episode were higher than the Star Beast in my opinion, but I think that the lows in here were just as bad, if not slightly worse, in my opinion, than what we had in the Star Beast. So it's a hard one to track. Again, I won't give an actual score with this one because, again, I want to see how these 3 specials play out overall before I start giving scores. But I do enjoy this one. Whether I prefer it to the Star Beast, I'm not entirely sure, but maybe when we get to the end of the giggle, maybe I'll have a better idea of that. But I did enjoy the episode. I appreciate the risks that it took. I liked the more confined approach that it took with only having 2 characters, or rather 2 actors, for the majority of the episode. I do like the idea of the villains. I like the background story. I thought it was tense at some points and it worked very well. And seeing Wilf again obviously melted my heart. So I did enjoy this one. Of course, we have got the giggle coming up, which is going to be the last of these 3 specials. Very excited to see what they do there with wrapping up everything, bringing back the toy maker, and how we're going to resolve everything with 14 and leading to the 15th Doctor. I'm very curious to see how that is going to pan out. So yeah, that is it for this review. Thank you all very much for watching. Please let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on this episode. Did you feel similar to me, or did you feel different? Did you think it was an amazing episode? Did you think it was slightly below average because of the more experimental elements? Let me know all about that down below. Leave a like on the video. Make sure to subscribe if you are brand new. And I will catch you all later in the next video for my review of the 3rd and final of this 3-part 60th anniversary specials, The Giggle. Until then, I will catch you on the next video.